Hey there, my name is Alex, I am the Silver Mont, and in this video we are going to talk about the advantages and disadvantages when it comes to created characters versus pre-made or set characters in video games. Example, the difference between Skyrim and The Witcher 3, between Dark Souls and Sekiro, and so on and so forth. In Skyrim you create your character, in The Witcher 3 you are playing as Geralt of Rivia. Now I don't think one is strictly better than the other, both have their pros and cons depending on the game. I made a similar video some time back about open world and linear games, wherein I had much the same argument. Open world is not automatically better than a linear game or vice versa. And yet despite that, open world games are often touted as some sort of upgrade, as in an open world game is automatically better than a linear game, instead of merely being different. It's not like 4K being a direct upgrade over 1080p, over 720p, over standard definition, and so on. And yet, create your own character is often a selling point, as if it is often treated as something that is better than not having it. And I would argue there are certain games wherein it is not doing much for the overall experience and it would be better if you did not create your own character. So let's start things off with what I consider a good example of each. First up, Dragon's Dogma. This is a game with a very good character creation system, especially for the time it came out, which was early 2012 I want to say. Why was it good? Well, not only are you relatively detailed in how you want your character to look, it plays into the game. Are you playing a tall and bulky character? Well, then you're going to have longer reach than a smaller character. You'll be able to carry more items, and because you weigh more, you'll be more resistant to things that might push you or carry you, such as enemies lifting you up or heavy winds pushing you around. On the other hand, if you're a smaller character, you'll be able to fit into smaller spaces. You can move and climb faster. I think it made your stamina regenerate faster too, all sorts of things. So not only are you designing the character that fits your mental image, it has some impact in gameplay. Furthermore, your character in Dragon's Dogma is very much a blank slate, as in Dark Souls. Your character never speaks. They are perfect for role-playing and projecting, self-inserting. I know a lot of people don't like silent protagonists, but I would argue they are often better than, well, say let's just use Skyrim and Fallout as those are popular. Whilst you don't audibly hear your character in Skyrim, you're still picking from dialogue options in most conversations. Whilst they can try to be broad and cater to as many options as possible, they're still forcing you to pick from limited responses, and it seems that as games continue to release, our options are becoming more and more limited in that aspect. Hopefully you get my point here. Having no response means you are free to imagine or roleplay what your character said. In Dark Souls, it uses a very simple yes or no most of the time. For all other conversations, it's merely a case of the NPC is speaking to you and then you formulate what your character's own response would be, whether it's staying silent or saying this, that or the other, or maybe just attacking them, pushing them down a well. How your character acts is left entirely up to gameplay and imagination. Now, personally, I enjoy that for those kinds of games. You might well make the argument that that's just lazy game design, letting the player fill in the blanks. To some extent, I can see the point there, but to go back to Dark Souls and Dragon's Dogma, those games work for me because the gameplay is good. I am happy to fill in the blanks with some of the other aspects, such as story, and I don't think there's anything wrong with that. Think back to older generations of games, the 90s, 80s, 70s even. Games could be simplistic, but it was your imagination that would help flesh it out. Hell, I imagine many of you have played at least one JRPG back in the 90s, where the graphics were very simplistic, but you still got the impression of some grand, epic adventure. And I'm sure to many people, say Final Fantasy VII felt a lot more epic and huge than Final Fantasy 15. Now, of course, part of that might be you might have been a kid when you played 7, but imagination it's a very powerful thing, and I don't think it's wrong to include that in game design. But to go back to Dark Souls and Dragon's Dogma, Those games work for me because the gameplay is good. I'm happy to fill in the blanks. Skyrim, though, feels like a more guided experience, almost akin to something like Mass Effect. Your Shepard might have taken different decisions to my Shepard. It might look different. My Shepard might be male, yours might be female, but it's still Shepard. Having preset dialogue choices forces all players into those options. Don't get me wrong, I'm not saying those are horrible. It depends on the game, it depends on a lot of things, and they can work. I just prefer the silent protagonist for a game with created characters. How about for games with set characters then? Well, even in those we have cases like Witcher 3, where it's still a role-playing game. You are role-playing as Geralt of Rivia. You can choose between his replies, versus games like, say, Doom or Metal Gear Rising, where you are playing as Doomguy and Raiden respectively, but you don't really choose anything. You're just there to witness their personality, you might say. Obviously, they aren't RPGs. Devil May Cry isn't an RPG. In the case of The Witcher 3, whilst you can choose between yes, no, maybe to simplify, you are always acting within Geralt's personality, which is both helpful for developers as it prevents you from doing wildly out of character and inconvenient things. It also works for gameplay. You are guiding Geralt, and even if he says yes to one thing and no to another, it is still within his personality, as obviously circumstances can change your answers. We can customize our Geralt. Whether he's specialising in alchemy, science or melee, he's still a Witcher. This limited customization might not sound good compared to complete freedom, but sometimes it is better to have that more refined and polished experience, even if it is technically limited. I would rather play Devil May Cry that focuses almost entirely on tight and perfect combat than a game that tries to do everything and ends up being mediocre in all areas, you know? Perhaps more important than good examples, the bad examples. And the first bad example is the primary reason I made this video. Anthem. Anthem was a video game that came out early 2019, was a severe disappointment for many reasons. And in Anthem, you create your own character for absolutely no reason. You choose the appearance of your human pilot despite never seeing them because you're walking around in first person when you're not in combat. When you are in combat, you're in third person in a robot suit, so you never see your character. Anthem was supposed to be split between action, mech game, and deep BioWare RPG. Only the latter of those 2 points was comically bad. The RPG aspects of Anthem involve walking around a hub and talking to people, and sometimes you can say yes or no. But good grief, if the player character isn't the single most bland character I've ever seen in a video game. People used to make jokes at how generic the characters were in Gears of War, but all those memes aside, anyone who held conviction in that belief was just dim-witted. You couldn't see the elegance of the design in Gears of War. It isn't a character study with hundreds of hours to establish and develop these individuals. We're not going to play Gears of War 1 as a 200-hour RPG like The Witcher. What is Gears of War? It's a 5-hour third-person shooter, maybe a few more hours, maybe a few less. It's fast-paced, it's action-driven, with a few slower moments spread throughout for the story to help develop itself. But clearly the emphasis is on the action. When you're in a third-person shooter, one of your squad members does a call-out during the action, you need to know immediately who is speaking. Gears of War does this perfectly. You can laugh at how generic the designs are, but that doesn't mean they are bad. A lot of people get generic and bad mixed up. Generic does not mean bad. In fact, it is a point in the game's favour. The main cast are designed extremely well for the type of game they are in. Marcus is stoic. There is anger bubbling just below the surface. He's like a thundercloud on the horizon. Dom is the enthusiastic foil, the stereotypical perfect second player. He's always got your back. He's the bro. Hell, the game starts with him busting you out of jail. He is the super bro. Cole is the larger-than-life. Quite literally, he is huge. He's pseudo-comedy relief member of the team, along with his own partner, Bed, the tech support, the brains, the snarky, sassy one. See, these characters don't need to be absurdly developed to be well designed, because it's a 5-hour-long third-person shooter. Anthem, on the other hand, was meant to be, what, a 50-hour RPG, 100-hour RPG, an ongoing RPG, so having a character you create should matter. It should have some impact on the game, or at the very least, allow you to roleplay. Instead, you are effectively playing as the world's blandest person who has no personality, no real opinions, no nothing. This isn't gonna work in the Dark Souls sense in that you're a blank slate. Your character is clearly written as a character. It's not that you are making your character. They are one. They're just extremely boring. They have no defining personality traits beyond maybe being a sassy bitch boy. See, a trend in a lot of Western RPGs, especially lately, has been lots of sass and sarcasm. Don't get me wrong, sass and sarcasm are great when used appropriately. But to make that your entire persona, that's used by people who have no persona, no character, no personality. They are aware of how boring they are because they have no opinions on anything, so they just respond to everything sardonically, sarcastically, ironically, to avoid any criticism. BioWare, Bethesda, there are many game developers and games you can look at where they increasingly rely on sarcasm in conveying personality, and it is obnoxious and also poor writing. That is generally what choices come down to in many modern RPGs. Will you help save my daughter from bandits? Yes. No, which means yes, and sarcastic yes. When it comes to Anthem, you have to ask yourself, what advantage is there to the game allowing us to create our character? Why is it in the game? What does it add? What does it benefit the overall experience? Because, believe me, I thought long and hard about it, and I couldn't come up with a single reason. If I asked the developers, I don't think they could come up with a single reason either. They would say, to deliver the sort of deep RPG Bethesda fans have come to expect. How did that work out for you? On the other hand, I can think of many reasons to have preset characters. See, what Anthem did a lot better than the RPG stuff was the mech combat. They're not strictly mechs, whatever, they're suits that you go in, whatever, Iron Man suits. You had 4 different ones to choose from. These should have been their own characters. Whether you have it that each mech has its own pilot with their own personality, or the mechs themselves are AI, sentient, whatever, however you want to do it, it's so much better to imagine. Think of it this way. You're playing Anthem, your Colossus was enthusiastically giving combat shoutouts. It would be a lot better if you transplanted the Gears of War squad personalities into those 4 robots. The game would have felt so much more alive compared to 4 players who are all technically the same person. They're silently walking around the battlefield as different coloured clones of each other. When cutscenes start, you'd have them do more than just hover in the background as a palette-swapped variant of your pathetic player character who whinges like a child. If you've played Anthem, do you remember that one quest where some bad guy, not even like an important bad guy, just some like random mook, he takes your journal and your character is on the verge of tears? Hey, give that back! Excuse me, what? It's almost an achievement that they managed to make someone who pilots such a cool robot into such a loser. I mean, what is this, Evangelion? At least Shinji had a few moments where he wasn't a complete loser. Then there are games where you are playing as a set character and you have no personality, and they never speak or do anything worthy of being called a character, so it's like, why bother? Why are we not just creating our own character at that point? Indeed, there are games that tread that line. Look at Legend of Zelda. Link is an established character, but in many ways, it is almost like an RPG where you make your own character, because Link's character traits are subdued and often it seems to be encouraged that you are projecting yourself onto Link. It's something, I mean, most people can sort of relate to it. If you played Ocarina of Time, you were at some point probably a child, I would hope, and you wanted to go on an adventure. Link is your surrogate in that instance. But that's not to say Link hasn't been more expressive at times. Wind Waker Link, for example, he has a lot of personality just from the expressions that he makes with his face. The different Links often manage to convey upon the player a sense of who they are, even if they don't really speak, and I think that's interesting and another case of good design. If I ask you to describe Link, you might struggle. You might say, well, he wears a green tunic, but that's describing what he looks like. I want you to describe what is Link like, and you might struggle with that. But if I said, on the other hand, describe Twilight Princess Link, or Wind Waker Link, you would have a better time of it, because even though they are all Links, they have some individuality. And ultimately, you might say what it boils down to is Marcus, Dom, Baird and Cole, they can all be described. JD, Cat, and the third guy in Gears of War 4, who I don't even remember the name of, you can't describe them. Luke, Han Solo, Princess Leia, you can describe them. Rey and Finn, yeah, no. It's just something I wish more game developers would actually think about. You need to ask yourself simple questions when you're making a game, or a movie, or a book, anything. What is the point? If there is no point, if there is no good point, why is it there? What is the point in Anthem of creating your own character? There is no good reason for it to be there, so it shouldn't be there. If anything, I can only imagine they put it in because, as mentioned earlier, that's what people expect from BioWare games. Doing things because they are expected is not a good reason. What was the point of weapon durability in Breath of the Wild? See, there, I think I understand what they were going for. It just so happens that it was a really poorly thought out decision and it didn't work. It's like Dark Souls 2. I can see what they were going for in Dark Souls 2 with many of the mechanics, like, say, soul memory. I get what they were going for. It was just poorly executed. Why do horses have stamina in Red Dead Redemption? To stop you from infinitely galloping. Why aren't you allowed to infinitely gallop? To add some element of strategy in horse races and other situations where some control or mastery might be necessary. Fair enough. Why do the mechs in Anthem have limited flight? To prevent you from reaching other areas in the semi-open world a few seconds faster? That's not a reason. To stop you hovering indefinitely in combat? Alright, that is a different mechanic, and it could be disconnected from actually flying around, as that's another case of bad design. Sure, the Storm is designed to hover in combat more than the other classes, so sure, the Storm should be able to hover longer, but when you're just flying around the open world, there is no reason to limit that flight. It is a mechanic that serves no purpose. It's like if in GTA you had fuel. What would the point in that be? It would make it more realistic, but ultimately it wouldn't add anything into the game. It would just be a pointless mechanic, you know? Do you get where I'm going with this? I hope so. What it probably boiled down to in Anthem is BioWare having no elegant solution for people just flying around in circles at high speed during combat and breaking the game. It's the same logic one can apply to many video games. I mean, let's look at Dark Souls. Let's look at Sekiro. Why do we play as Wolf in Sekiro? Because it's a more character-driven experience than Dark Souls. The entire game heavily revolves around Wolf's involvement and relationship with his charge, Kuro. Your character interactions in Dark Souls are far less relevant, they can be ignored outright. You could probably go through all of Dark Souls without ever speaking to a single NPC. It's a role-playing game, you create your character, their backstory, their motivations. From extrapolation, we can gauge quite some things about Elden Ring's story, as this is another From game where we'll be creating our own characters to explore the world. So, just from extrapolation, we can assume it's going to be more like Dark Souls than Sekiro. But hey, what do you think? What are some of your favourite games with created characters? Or games with pre-made characters? Are there any games that you played where you wished you were playing your own character, or are there games where you wish you were not playing your own character? Now Neo's an interesting one, just to finish this video off with. Neo 1 you play as William, Neo 2 we're making our own characters, so I wonder how that's going to play out. Either way, let me know your thoughts down in the comments, and until next time, take care.
Alright, so it's a comedy.
I was thinking more along dramatic lines, but if you prefer something lighter... Listen, merely decide and I'll get to work.
Think comedy's the safer option.
Very well. I must get to work. While you must pick a corner, sit down, read silently, or just think. All right?
Fine, since you don't need help with the writing.